The first sign you've self-actualized, according to Abraham Maslow, is that you've stopped lying to yourself. Abe wouldn't lie to me and I wouldn't lie to you, and hopefully you've stopped lying to yourself on a daily basis. I know in the past you used to get away with all these little lies, all of these victim mentality complexes where it wasn't my fault and I could have done better, but blah, 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 blah. You've stopped doing that. You accept that truth is powerful. On the spectrum between truth and falsehood, you are tilted towards the true. This is the first of 15 signs of self-actualization I'm going to break down in this video, especially the farther reaches of human nature. Hopefully you can see that there. My copy is falling apart. But if you're looking for where I get my reference material, it is specifically from page 318, and I'm breaking down this chart that Maslow puts together. And of course, there's many more books that we're going to break down in this one take. Steady flow, self-actualization, spectrum, self-calibration video. If you're interested in intermediate to advanced psychology, then stick around all the way to the end. This isn't basic self-development. We're going to go pretty hard on some pretty controversial points. But let's wrap up on the first point first, from Abraham Maslow himself. You stopped lying. And this is something which isn't always true. It's ironic because truth isn't always true. There is a time to lie tactically. Do you lie to your children about a certain painful moment that you experience when they ask you, how was your day? Yes, you probably do. Do you lie to a partner in a different trivial situation? Maybe you do, but you're oriented towards truth. If you imagine spectrum of +5 truth, -5 falsehood, I want you to be at least +2 towards true. There's going to be 15 spectrums throughout this video. And if you're generally oriented, the positive orientation, +1, +2, maybe +3 or +4 towards the self-actualizing principle, the virtue, the value of self-actualization, you're going to be wonderfully self-calibrated, and you'll also be able to look for those gaps in your psyche, the lacuna of your self-development, and start filling in those places that could do with a bit of extra attention. It's a full preamble before a very long video, but the overall point, I'm going to present 15 spectrums between one value and another value. Yes, it's dualistically framed, but that's ironically the second point, which is the second sign you're self-actualized, is that you're a holistic thinker rather than a black and white thinker. Classic self-development would say that you need to be open-minded and accept different perspectives. You're not just left or right. You're not just pro-man, pro-woman, pro-something, anti-something else. You are holistic. That's a classic self-development principle. But what does that mean at the deeper level? If you're truly interested in self-actualizing in this lifetime, holistic psychology and holistic philosophy is an integrated part of your day-to-day reality. When you're faced with a choice between option A and option B, you don't trigger finger your way through quick choices in either direction. You might have moral principles, you might have deeper values that would guide you one way or the other, but you can pause to see the multiple perspectives. When there's an argument between yourself and a loved one, you can sit back and calm your nervous system and be able to consider their point. You might disagree with their point, but you can consider it. You don't have to be all black or all white. They don't have to be the opposite. There's more of a harmony in your inner world, and that, of course, creates a harmony in the outer world. The second point of holistic psychology is somewhat ironic to begin this video with, which is why I've organized it right at the beginning, because I'm going to present a spectrum in every single point. And if you're fundamentally holistically leaning, I would say that I'm probably +4 on the holistic spectrum. 0 would be I go either way. -5 would be I'm completely black and white. +5 would be I'm the most holistic man alive. +4, maybe +3. I'm maybe being a bit too grandiose. +3.5. Let's go there. I'm not fully holistic because even in the presentation of this video, I have to give some form of dualistic black and white framework to be able to communicate the ideas in an accessible manner on a YouTube video. I can't go too deep into the points, but the basic principle of self-actualization is that you see that many points have many different truths. It relates upwards and it relates downwards. This entire video is going to be several spirals through related points, and it's going to be quite an intellectual feast. If you're still interested in actualizing your cognition, consider going deeper into the third point, which is living process. Living process versus mechanized outcome. The self-actualized individual is vital and charged, and they ooze energy and passion for life in the day-to-day grind rather than suppressing their emotions for a mechanized outcome. This is most apparent in your work routine. If you pause and think, okay, how do I go about my Monday through Friday? How do I go about my gym? How do I go about my creative process? Am I just looking for outcomes, or am I living in the process? This third point of self-actualization is something that you'll only really relate to if you're actually a self-actualizing individual. Going to be tripping up on those words, I'm sure, throughout. If you're actually a self-actualizer, then you will actualize the possibility of living through the grind. You will be able to vitalize your routine. You won't be self-denying. You won't lose your emotion. You won't numb yourself out. You won't hustle and get through the day just because that's what you're meant to do. You'll find a way to bring passion through. And you'll notice this in people who don't do it by contrast. You might have colleagues from an old job, or maybe family members who are still in your life, or you've got friends even, close friends that you really care about. And you can see them go through the same pattern where they cut off their feelings to be productive. They find a way to numb out their sensations so they can get to the outcome, the mechanized outcome, the robotic state of endless work or endless to-do lists. But the self-actualizing individual finds a way to still get the outcome while also living in the process. Measure yourself on the spectrum from living process to mechanized outcome. Where do you generally reside? And of course, as every single point in this video will make clear, there's always a time and a place for the opposite principle. Don't be dualistic. There is a time for mechanized outcomes, but it shouldn't be your default. The default should be tilted towards the self-actualizing virtue rather than the non-actualizing virtue. For simplicity's sake, that's the language we're going to use, and this is something that Abraham Maslow goes into in excessive detail in The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. My copy is pretty beaten up, as well as my copy of another book here, which I'll go into when it's appropriate. Start with this one. If you really want to get into Maslow's humanistic psychology and go beyond the pyramid structure of basic needs and higher needs, then look at the specific meta needs and being values of the self-actualizer, which again is from page 318 of this book. I'm translating 1960s language into something which is friendly on YouTube. Let's move on to the fourth point. And this is one of my favorite points in the whole list. The self-actualized person has a beautiful mind rather than an ugly mind. And this isn't just a state of presence. It's a state of perception, or it's a quality of perception that you experience on the inside and that colors your experience of the outside. The person with the beautiful mind assumes ignorance rather than malice when someone has done them wrong. It's not because, again, black and white thinking from a previous point, it's not because they are certain political leaning, certain race, certain religion, certain gender or orientation. It's because they don't know any better. They might have had some childhood trauma, they may be hooked up on a substance or two. It doesn't mean that they're not responsible for their words, but because you have a beautiful mind, the toxicity and the ugliness of the world does not pass through that pure state of perception and ultimately that beautiful peace that you feel on the inside. You'll perceive the outside world, if you're a self-actualizer, with a state of serenity being your more or less consistent baseline. And this isn't just for the outside world, you'll experience it on the inside too. You generally lose the negative self-talk because ugly words and ugly phrases don't exist within your consciousness, at least not at the baseline. For myself, I'd say that my beautiful mind is probably again, a plus 3.5, plus 4, but I do have moments where I swing back on the spectrum towards a state of ugliness. My main trigger, honestly, if I'm being real about my presence online, is when I get an extremely ignorant, hateful comment on one of my YouTube videos. The comments about who I am, what I sound like, what I look like, the fact that I haven't read any of these books, even though I've documented it for years, all of these very basic things, which is so low level, and yet it does create that immediate, fighty, maybe more testosterone-driven masculine response. And it's about 2 or 3 seconds of go away, F you energy, but I calm it down. My beautiful mind takes over, and usually if you go down to the comment section, you'll see me wishing people well, even if they've brought some hatred into my own life. I try not to feed it. I don't feed the ugliness. The ugliness comes in. It maybe creates an itch or a sensation of ugliness inside of me. There's that possibility of downslide, but the beautiful perception takes over, And that's one of the strong indications of self-actualization. It's not that you're completely unaffected by the world. It's not that you've perfectly integrated all of your ugliness, but you're oriented towards something beautiful. Let's move on to the fifth point of the video, and I'll take a sip of coconut water to get myself ready for this one. It's good choices versus evil choices. We're entering into complex metaphysical and religious territory, arguably, with this point. What does it mean to be a self-actualizer? I'd say one of the great points to consider is you make good choices. Good choices in the superficial sense, but good choices in the deeper, moralistic, soulful sense. It can relate to your health, it can relate to your wealth, it can relate to your relationships, it can relate to your connection with God. What does it mean for you to tilt towards evil? And what does it mean for you to tilt towards the moral good on a day-by-day basis, but also, crucially, over the many months and many years of your life? What is a good life? For me personally, it's many of the points that we're going to get into in this video. There's ideas around mission and purpose and self-actualization through service, and also honoring my body with beautiful food and beautiful movement and all of the beauty that we were just talking about. It's exciting. You can see the joy on my face. That feels good. Goodness feels good in the body. It's an idea that Alexander Lowen talks about from a somatic therapy or bioenergetic perspective, that joy is joy because joy is joyful. He doesn't say it that way, but the repetition of the word joy, the pleasure of the body, the pleasure of the spirit is fundamentally good. And the inverse, evil choices, bad choices, cruel choices, and ignorant choices, unfortunately, feel physically bad. The depressed state, to some extent, if you go down a certain somatic psychology perspective, is too many bad choices, too many bad conversations, too many bad experiences from the outside, from the inside going out, that become chronic and perpetual. You're tilted in the bad. You're living in the bad. You're rooted in the bad. Doesn't mean you're bad, but the environment on the outside and the inside has become too bad, but there is the possibility of making it good. I don't think you can be a self-actualizer if on a day-by-day basis you're making evil choices, evil perceptions, and you're living in an evil way. It seems pretty obvious to me, but levels of goodness go up in gradations and levels of evil go down towards hell in various spiky, thorny steps. Just watch out for which way you're going. We'll move on to the sixth point of this video. I'm feeling this is going to be a long one, maybe the longest one on the channel so far. The sixth sign of self-actualization: you choose refined activity rather than sloppy activity. Sloppy activity might sound like some kind of exciting bedroom moment, but not those kinds of sloppy activities. We're talking about the way of the sophisticated, intentional action. The refined activity, the refined action, the careful craft of finishing your work in a way that makes you proud. Having that conversation, the difficult conversation with the family member or the friend in a way which is righteous in the best possible sense. That feeling of, I have my principles, I have my values, and I'm going to be kind. That healthy, almost divine righteousness, the quiet, humble righteousness within. Because you have refinement. Another word would be sophistication, but divinity is only a few steps away. Divine choices, that's a far more inspiring word, but it's a bit too religious for most people. And yet later on in the list, we'll see how faith does have a role in this self-actualization process. What does it mean to be refined? Well, you've probably had some moments in your life, especially when you've been healing trauma, where you've made sloppy choices. You've sabotaged your health with substances, you've destroyed relationships with lies and misdirection, and you haven't been earning a sustainable income in a truly self-actualizing way. You made sloppy choice after sloppy choice. You weren't focused, you weren't clear, you were fuzzy, you were foggy, you were ambiguous. Doesn't mean you're bad. I'm not trying to shame you, but if you're generally making refined choices and you're consistently not taking the sloppy choice, the low-grade choice, the base decision, you're probably a self-actualizer. You're probably oriented towards truth. And again, you're probably oriented towards goodness. You're seeing how through all these different spectrums, they interravel, they come together. You could almost imagine all 15 of these points being like embedded in a sphere. Imagine the bands of a sphere, and it rolls and rolls and rolls, and on one side, one polarity, on the other side, the other polarity. Might not be the perfect metaphor, but hopefully you grasp that psycho-geographical metaphor just there. try and see where you are in terms of refinement and sloppiness. Otherwise, you can join me over for the 7th point of self-actualization, which is about ambition and aspiration. Critically, are you authentically aspirational or are you compulsively aspirational? And the key deciding factor is how connected are you with your intuition? This is something that Abraham Maslow talks about in Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences, which I believe, that comes up on the camera, was the very final book that he wrote in his life. He died suddenly and very unfortunately of a heart attack. Just as Maslow was at the peak of his fame, he'd been given massive press opportunities, powerful positions in the American psychoanalytic movement. He died of a heart attack. And this was one of the final books. I think it was the final book he wrote. He wrote a few more essays while he was in that final year. But this book, very timely, almost haunting, that he was speaking about deep religious values and the authenticity and the intuition which is tied into authentic faith. But faith need not be the deciding factor, because ultimately you know if you're being authentic or inauthentic based on your internal intuitive sense, again, of good and evil, right and wrong, beauty and ugliness. You know if you're striving based on a good reason or a reason that someone else gave you. Are you fulfilling parental needs? Are you fulfilling societal desires? Are you fulfilling some old narrative which was never yours to begin with? You've probably passed through the stage. If you're a self-actualizing individual, you've already abandoned a career path. You've already left a relationship. You've already had a difficult conversation with a family member and radically transformed the way that you're going to engage for the future. You let go of the compulsive way of being. And that ties into your aspiration and ambition for the future. If you're authentically ambitious, you're not building a career because you have to build a career because somebody told you to. You do it because you want to, because it feels good, because it feels joyful. The same with creativity, the same with a new romantic relationship, the same with the way that you raise your children. It's authentic aspiration. It's such a wonderful, simple concept, but the deciding factor isn't my voice, it's not your voice, it's not necessarily any societal voice or any vocal feeling at all. It's the felt sense of rightness. And that comes through on a day-by-day basis. This is making the right choice or the wrong choice at a deep level. Look at your vision for the future. If you have a 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan, double check it against the intuition which is wordless and yet deeper than any word could go. You'll know if you're making the right choice for that thing that you're struggling with right now. If you step back, go for a walk in nature, and ask your soul, what next? You'll see the compulsive path and you'll see the authentic path, and hopefully you'll be able to take that fork in the right direction. But of course, we often have to go down misdirected pathways to understand just what that feels like. And then the very classic phrase that I hear from my clients, I should have listened to my intuition. This is the initiation towards self-actualization. Enough burns, enough painful moments where we let ourselves down, where we ignored that healthy, loving, righteous voice of the soul. That tends to teach us the lessons in a pretty painful way. Moving on now to a related point. It's something we've spoken about pretty extensively, but it's the self-actualizing faith versus the non-actualizing faithlessness. I'm going to take another sip. This is religious to some extent. You might be in a certain religious tradition, maybe you were born in a certain religious tradition, but I'm going to make this vaguely and frustratingly spiritual so I can talk to more people, including you. The spiritual life in regards to how you orient yourself towards meaning and purpose and faith in your purpose and meaning in the world is a crucial question of the self-actualizer. Another book that I get to bring up at this moment is New Knowledge in Human Values, which is an essay collection which is heavily dominated by Abraham Maslow, and this is a fantastic book which again literally fell apart. Well, the book split right down the middle, which I suppose is a fun synchronicity given that I've artificially dualistically done wrong by splitting two sides of the spectrum. It's okay, this book's probably 50, 60 years old. Just an aside point, if you're not learning from your books and creating a living relationship with the book, and you're not willing to destroy the book in the pursuit of knowledge, I don't think it's really the best way to go about things. I think a book should be real and felt, and life is decay, and the book sometimes falls apart, and I'm the last owner of this particular book, and I find that pretty beautiful. Coming back away from the book point, and I'll pick that one up later. Faith versus faithlessness. The self-actualizing individual is oriented in a faith-based way to reality. This is simple things. Simple things like, things are always working out for me. It's no big deal. The next opportunity will come. Oh, it doesn't matter too much. That one hurt, but I know that I'm taken care of. It might be taken care of from God or the universe, depending on your language, but it could just be a faith in life itself. Whereas the faithless, apathetic, existentially heavy individual doesn't have the ability to draw energy from their faith-based convictions, and these convictions are the things that can get people through absolute atrocities. Usually, if you've been through trauma, I've been through trauma, you might have been through some significant trauma if you're interested in the videos I put on my channel. You need to develop a sense of faith to get through that, otherwise you don't get through it. The life can't sustain without a narrative of meaning to make sense of the pain. I'll say that again, your life cannot sustain without a meaningful narrative that can make sense of the pain, and faith is often the deciding factor. If you've gone through a few trials of trauma, if you've gone through a heartbreak, a devastation, and a period of loss, faith is usually that light in the darkness that gets us through that dark day, and the self-actualizing individual carries that faith all the way until their final breath. I would say that I'm probably plus 4.5 on faith, but I do have my moments where I swing into faithlessness when something bad happens, and that's where a prayer practice will come through. I like praying with my meals, I like contemplating on walks. I'm not going to go into it too much, but you practice your faith, and it's something to pay attention to. The 9th sign of self-actualization, moving on now into a pretty simple point and less high level, more practical. You understand the principle of limitation versus overexertion. This is especially important to focus on when it comes to work and when it comes to training or any kind of expressive action. If you're somebody like me who really enjoys going to the gym, I typically go to the gym 4 or 5 times per week. I'm interested in calisthenics, weightlifting, and a variety of alternative strongman style movements and primal movement patterns as well. I also like doing weighted rucks with a 20-kilogram pack. I like going for barefoot walks and being outside. I need to know when to limit myself. Sometimes I'll go to the gym in the morning, I'll have a video to shoot in the afternoon, and then I want to go for a 1-hour weighted walk before 2 client sessions later that day, and I can do it. I've done it. It's okay. But if I overexert, if I shift towards the non-actualizing perspective, I'm normally going to take away from maybe not the next day, maybe not the day after that, but sometime in the future I will crash. This is burnout and recovery, but from a self-actualizing perspective. If you can understand your limitations, for me, I need 9 hours of sleep to be able to do the physical work and the mental and emotional work that I do at my very best. Sometimes I'll sleep for 10 hours or more, especially when I end my week on a Sunday and take my Monday off. I understand that I need to recover, but to recover well, I need to limit myself. Just check your own day-to-day routines on this spectrum of overexertion to limitation, and know that limitation will bring more vitality if you choose sensible limits. Less can be more. And you're probably familiar with the fact that you already have some areas where you're overextending, and some areas where you're not properly putting the boundary in place. But this does relate to, fortunately, the very next point, point number 10, the self-actualizing principle. This is a huge topic, but I'm going to make it accessible. Order versus chaos, the principle of order, the principle of chaos, but more specifically, justice and lawfulness versus lawlessness, and this chaotic dissolution of boundaries. If you're interested in building that previous principle of self-actualizing limitation, you need to understand how to order your inner world and your outer world according to all of these self-actualizing values and beliefs. I'll slow it down. Make this practical. Just consider this. Pause and reflect. In what ways are you breaking your own rules? Do you even have an internal constitution? Do you have a series of policies? I know it's very traditional, very masculine, very judicial in many ways, but do you have the equivalent of laws that you abide by? Moral laws. Most of us don't go around breaking certain commandments from a Christian perspective of hurting, harming, or otherwise taking the life of another human being. We don't do that. That's a law that we follow. But at the most extreme and most obvious sense that we're not going to do that, where do you draw your laws and limitations? And crucially, how consistent are you with preventing the chaos from engulfing your day-to-day reality? The world is tilted towards entropy. I mentioned this earlier. The book fell apart, all things decay. There is beauty in the chaos. The seasons have their rhythm, even though it's chaotic in the week-by-week weather. And yet, for the sake of simplicity on a very deep metaphysical point, self-actualizing individuals are ordered within the chaos of the outer world. They have internal chaos, they have internal order, there's external chaos and external order, but as a basic principle, I want you to be 80% ordered in what I believe to be more or less an 80% disorganized and chaotic social environment. There's many things that we see going on. For me personally, I have rules around sobriety. I'm over 5 years sober. At the time of filming this video, I have rules around social media. Even just today, I put up a community post saying that I'm going to start a new experiment with a second offline phone where I don't even use YouTube for 3 days of the week, because honestly, I've been breaking my own rules and restrictions about how much learning is good learning, when does high quality content become trash content, not because it's bad, but because I'm giving it trash focus. When I'm not paying attention, what rules do I need to update in my own life? For me, I have sobriety, I have social media boundaries, I only use Instagram 3 days per week, and now I need to have a new rule in place to be my most self-actualizing individual that I can possibly be, and that means not being compulsive and watching YouTube educational videos when they actually stop becoming educational, and I'm just caught in these waves of fitness and finances and psycho-spiritual development. My pursuit of more intelligence makes me dumber by the minute. Just something that I'm working through right now. Literally this day, put a post up over on the community. If you're watching this in the future, you can go back and see it. Find your rules, find your guidelines, and try and stick to them in a soulful way for as long as possible without sacrificing too much for it. You have to sacrifice some, and you have to sacrifice usually a lot for a small period of time, but you don't need to sacrifice your joy, your happiness, your feeling of satisfaction in life, because a good rule increases life. A healthy boundary improves your vitality. Boundaries against who gets to come into your world, who you share your body with, who you share your soul with, who you share your secrets with. And boundaries, of course, against yourself and your own compulsive behaviors when you're late, when it's up late at night and no one's around, or when no one's looking and you choose to consume things that people just shouldn't consume very often. All those private thoughts, it goes back to every point we've mentioned, the beautiful mind versus the ugly mind, the goodness versus the evil. Take those principles, turn them into boundaries, and set your life in order. Won't be perfect, but it's something that at the very least we should try and aim towards. We'll move over to the 11th point, wrapping up now on the video, final third. You're oriented towards playfulness rather than humorlessness. Can you take a joke? Can you take it not so seriously, or just tap into the energy of playfulness? Here I am making all these points. I'm trying to be optimized with my minute-by-minute presentation so that people don't get bored and leave, so they stay around all the way to the end. And I'm doing this theatrical presentation. I'm using nice language, and it's all a bloody joke. It's very serious. It's a very serious topic. I mean, Maslow on Management is a fantastic book that you want to read, just to bring out another book, because why not? Maslow on Management. This is a book for all the serious entrepreneurs and serious business leaders, a collection of essays designed for the revolutions in different motivational structures and the hierarchical companies where everything needs to be set and everything needs to be optimized. But even Maslow, when he's talking about how to optimize a business structure, he encourages playfulness, he encourages humor, he encourages the ability to break down the social ties between the boss and the employee. And this is something which really isn't so much of an issue these days, but you got to remember that these ideas were being developed in the 1940s, 1950s, and to some extent implemented as early as the 1960s. Maslow was writing in the 40s when Europe was in pieces because of hierarchical structures related to the military. Yes, it's a complex story, but overall, the basic idea of do what I say because I said so and don't joke around with me, that was the classic leadership mentality until things started to shift towards a more person-centric way of managing. And the management principle might seem abstract if you're not a CEO or you're not in a leadership position, but just think about how you lead yourself. Do you lead yourself with a healthy balance between seriousness and playfulness? Can you laugh at your own mistakes? Can you find it funny when things don't go your way? Do you have that grace, that ability to be silly? Can you make animal noises and fart jokes and silly puns and not get so damn dense? Which is especially important for people like myself, probably people like you, who are more intellectually oriented, and we want the world to be all organized together, and we want to understand our concepts, and want to know where one piece connects to another piece. And of course, when you're talking about moral principles, you want to make sure that there's a right way and a wrong way, black and white thinking. There's the trap. Playfulness, the humor, the monk-like laugh. That's something that's a really good sign of self-actualization. Can you take a joke? Can you give a joke? And can you be spontaneous in your humor with people that you enjoy being around? If not just yet, consider taking an improv class, or at the very least, just be a bit more silly on a daily basis. I personally enjoy making up random songs every now and again, or just throw out a verse. I'll just be doing something and I'll start rhyming just because it's fun. I'll be outside and there'll be a squirrel in the tree and I'll make a noise at the squirrel and then I'll laugh out loud and go back on my walk. It seems like I'm insane for someone who's on the outside, but if you've been in that state of consciousness, it's very, very, very rewarding. It's not the permanent state, but it is a place that you should be able to visit and enjoy. Let's move over to a related point. Point number 12, the 12th sign of self-actualization. You live generally within peaceful simplicity rather than complex, confusing energy. I screwed that one up just a little bit there, which is ironic because I just talked about, I'm 30 minutes into a one-take video. Can't do this perfectly. My mouth's drying up. Look like a bit of a baboon there. Peaceful simplicity versus confusing complexity. How ironic that I stumbled over confusing complexity because I've made an arguably way too complex video for a single YouTube take. I've fallen into this trap, and actually, if I'm honest, I suppose in this moment, I'm going to be completely honest with you. While I'm talking, I probably am the weakest in this self-actualizing trait. It's probably the one that I'm working on the most. I still overcomplicate my life. I don't live a peacefully simplistic life. It's not a shocking statement maybe for you to hear. It seems pretty obvious that I've taken on too many books, too many ideas, too many ambitions, authentic or inauthentic, aspirational in a healthy way or compulsive. I don't know. I'm still working on that. I think it's healthy, but at the same time, healthy aspirations can still become unnecessarily complex if I don't try and focus on simplicity and peaceful simplicity in a very specific sense. For me, what I try and aim towards, even though I'm probably -3, maybe even -4 sometimes in overcomplicating things, I try and aim for the essence of the matter. When I'm working with a client and we're 20 minutes deep into a very particular moment of their childhood and we're stuck on why it just isn't landing, why isn't the therapeutic work working, what have we missed, which relationship aren't we considering, which sensation in the body have we ignored, I try and step back, and I don't do it literally because I'm sitting, but I'll go back just a little bit and go, Sometimes I go, out loud, sometimes it's not appropriate, but internally I go like this. What's the essence of the issue? And often when I ask that question, what's the essence of the issue? The simple statement clears up the complexity. I apply that as often as I can, that very principle of what's the essence? What's the core of this? What's the root issue? How would I solve this if it was a single, simple answer? That kind of questioning on a day-to-day basis really carries me through my naturally overcomplicated and overly complex way of engaging with the world. And if you're still struggling with that like I am, just consider taking a step back from work relationships, romantic relationships, even challenging trauma-based healing inside yourself, and asking the simple question. This moves us on to point number 13 for the video, the self-actualization principle, which kind of begins the self-development journey, begins the spiritual journey, that's for sure, is you recognize your uniqueness rather than your replaceability. We've just up-leveled the video a bit on this final stage. Hopefully you can feel the change in energy. You recognize that you're special. That sounds like a joke. I'm laughing at the specialness because special Snowflake, and yes, we're all special. And mommy gave me a pat on my head when I was younger and told me that I was a very special little boy. I'm not talking about that kind of special. I'm talking about the specialness, the uniqueness, and the irreplaceability of your soul. And by extension, your self-actualizing true self. At least your character development, your ego development, the things that you do in the world, they may have some replaceability. I, even as a teacher who has a somewhat unique way of living, I'm one of thousands of men and women who have a book-based approach towards trauma healing, transpersonal psychology, and self-development. I haven't been the first in history, I'm not going to be the last in history. I'm just here in this window between, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm not that special. I have a degree of specialness which separates me from a more conventional situation working in a more conventional job. But on the inside, I've learnt this principle by recognizing my depth at a spiritual level. And you can start doing things like active imaginations, mystical experiences. I did a lot of fasting experiences. I had some moments where I thought I may be experiencing a past life, but in retrospect, I think it's more of a metaphorical, symbolic interpretation of a feeling of depth which goes back and beyond. It's more of a universal non-dual state of consciousness which wrapped in a story rather than a past life. That's a topic for another conversation. I recognize my own specialness, and then in recognizing my specialness, the polarity comes in, and this is one of the best points in the entire video to illustrate that, again, specialness and non-specialness, uniqueness and replaceability, they're a spiral which has multiple levels and multiple stages of self-actualizing growth. You start seeing yourself as very special, and then you're actually quite replaceable, and then you're very special again, and guess what? You're just like everyone else. There's a humility and there's a humor in that process, and you can probably relate if you've gone through that first stage of spiritual awakening and you believe that you are indeed a starseed, or you've got your twin flame, or you're here to be a light worker, you're one of the 144,000 angels sent from a different planetary system. Isn't that convenient that you happen to be that individual? You've gone through that. Or maybe you're someone who has grandiosity issues based on some kind of superiority complex in combat with your same-sex parents when you were a child. You developed some kind of neurotic grandiosity, and therefore you are indeed the very special boy or girl because you've pumped yourself up in an artificial way. You've gone through all of that nonsense. And yet there's a different level of specialness beyond that healing path when you're grandiosely inflated, either from a trauma-based perspective, from a spiritual perspective, from a trauma spiritual perspective, and the two weaving together. That creates an opening to realize that you're not like the rest, but eventually you realize that you are like the rest, and then you come into contact with the deeper humanity within all of us. It's a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I know that it shifts over the decades, and definitely be curious to see where you are in your journey from specialness to non-specialness down in the comments section. I honestly shift depending on the day. Sometimes I feel like, well, I'm just a custodian of a certain type of consciousness. I just happen to be here, and by some perspective, maybe one perspective, I've got God's grace and God's given me a mission, planted some kind of idea in my heart to make this channel and do this work. And yet I also recognize that God may not play favorites, and I bet there's thousands of other men and women who are doing the same thing as me, and men and women who are going to make more impact at a greater scale, and that's wonderful as well, because it's not about me as an individual. That's almost going into non-dualistic humanity as a collective soul, and I think that's really inspirational at the deeper level of self-actualization. And maybe it takes us over to the 14th point, which is the self-actualizing self-sufficiency versus the non-actualizing codependency. It's almost an artificial duality. The codependent, always clingy, always avoidant, whatever form of codependence you want to go into. There's an entire video that I've done on that, but the codependent person isn't a self-actualizer because they're not truly in touch with their authentic self, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And then you've got self-sufficiency because that's someone who knows their true self, their higher self, capital S self, whichever synonym you want to use. It's a true duality. It's a true perspective that we need to pay attention to. And yet at the same time, because I've now unlocked the more advanced philosophy at the end of the video, the polarity itself is somewhat artificial. It doesn't exist. I've created this dualistic structure for the sake of communicating over the course of the last almost 40 minutes ideas in a graspable concept. But where do we draw the line between the self-sufficient individual and the codependent? Is it based on compulsiveness? Is it based on authenticity of who you choose to be in a relationship with? As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, more servants wait on man than he will ever know. How many thousands of men and women made the screen that you're watching me on? How many? think of the whole network, not just the factory workers, not just the miners, and I know there's issues around unethical labor off in Africa or different parts in Asia, but think not just of the raw material, all of the marketing departments, all of the companies, all of the delivery drivers, down to the postman or the shop clerk who then gave you this device when you bought it. How many people for one device? Look around the place that you're in. Think of all the histories. How many people? Maslow Business Reader, final book. It's a good moment to bring through the final book. This is another essay collection which I recommend you read. Abraham Maslow, Business Reader. It is similar to Maslow on Management. These are both two essay collections which were targeted towards the entrepreneurial classes, let's say, of the 1960s. I recommend that you go for this one first. This one's kind of a bonus extra. This one has extracts from the other books inside, so if you're actually looking for a second book to buy, in addition to The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, this one, do pick up the Maslow Business Reader. It's difficult to juggle 6 books, and why not? Because I'm in the moment. I recommend you pick up this biography of Maslow by Edward Hoffman. It's fantastic. Edward Hoffman, also interestingly, bonus book, wrote a biography of Wilhelm Reich, the incredible bioenergetic teacher who was the mentor of Alexander Lowen. So if you haven't read about Reich and his revolutionary ideas, some very controversial, I don't agree with everything that he's done, you could pick up these 2 books by the same biographer, and they are truly fantastic. I only found them quite recently, and I wish I had found them about 5 years ago, to be honest. So, bit of gold for those who stayed around to the end of the video. The material perspective, right there. More servants wait on man than we can possibly understand. Edward Hoffman, as a particular author, I don't know what he looks like. I don't know if he's even alive. I don't think he is. He might be. If you are Edward, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to have a chat with you about Maslow and Reich. But I'm dependent on him. I'm dependent on all of the teachers, all of the bookbinders, everyone who's interrelated. I'm exhausting the point. Just let it land that you'll never be truly self-sufficient, because the self is defined in relationship with the other. The I and the we duality becomes a singularity in the same way that the infant, the newborn, is not truly their own person. They're an extension of the mother, and yet they are very special and very unique at the same time. The attachment bonds of early childhood, the ego formation around age 2 to age 3. You're symbiotically connected with the mother. No one will go into a hospital, shout at the newborn in the crib and say, "You're a codependent, don't you know? Why don't you get off that breast and do something for yourself for once?" It's ridiculous. Dependency and interdependency is the healthy version of codependency. Self-sufficiency can become toxic, and the self-actualizing individual can calibrate themselves across the whole spectrum and know when they're tilted towards health or unhealth based on any value which would seem to be positive or negative, but nonetheless inverts at a certain stage on the journey. We have been through a whirlwind so far. I've got 1 point left to wrap up this video. And this is the point that I finished my video from the start of the year on. I had a video called 7 Habits for Self-Actualization. And after going through a daily and weekly routine to actually become a self-actualizer, I ended on this same point. And Maslow wrote about it too. I shifted it around a bit to serve my purposes because I'm self-fulfilling and I wanted to have a punchy intro and punchy exit from this video. I'm going to use simple words, but a deep, deep concept that I couldn't argue more strongly. The self-actualizing individual is wealthy. They're not poor, but they're wealthy not in the complex, not in the spiritual wealth, not in the emotional wealth perspective. We're not getting deep. I mean literal finances. It's a controversial opinion, and some people will be incredibly triggered. They think that I'm saying that you need to become a multimillionaire and exploit other people because money is evil and I've got all my money wounds, and all of these projections will start coming through quickly. What I mean about the duality between wealth and poverty, and how the self-actualizing individual has a healthy and abundant relationship to their finances, is that surely, if you have hit every single mark in this video, you're oriented towards the truth. You're holistic in your thinking. You work in living process rather than a mechanized outcome. You have a beautiful mind and not an ugly mind. You make good choices, not evil choices. You have refined actions and not the sloppy seconds. You're authentic in your aspiration. You have faith. You understand how to limit yourself. You follow your own boundaries. You're playful. and lighthearted when things don't go your way. You have a peaceful simplicity because you recognize your uniqueness and you're self-sufficient in the greater degree. How the hell are you not working a job which provides enough money for a really wonderful quality of life, and more importantly, provides for other people in a way that materializes all of that self-actualizing energy? What's the point of becoming an enlightened soul, becoming a truly self-actualized man or woman, if you haven't got a career, a creative outlet, some kind of work-based impact on the world that helps other people, that does something with all of this consciousness? I think it's the greatest shame and the greatest tragedy that some of the smartest, most capable, most empathic and spiritually awakened individuals don't earn money from work that aligns with their character. I've turned my character into this business, into this YouTube channel, into my client work, into my online course, Shadow Work Library. It's an extension of me, which is why I can do a one-take video for over 40 minutes at this stage, talking about 6 different books wrapped together, despite the fact that there's physical limitations on how much hydration is in my mouth and the fact that I don't get it perfect. I self-actualize my essence into an outer expression, and guess what? A couple quid will come back from YouTube from ad revenue, and later down the line, there might be someone who's watching right now who wants to go deeper with me into a 4-month mentorship, or someone who feels inspired to go and check out the links in the description and buy the Shadow Work Library, because it took me 5 years to put together that curriculum and nothing exists like it on the internet. I'd love to see you inside if you do want to see it. Link down in the description. It's authentic, it's organic, there's no divide. My money and my finances is earned through self-actualizing energy, and that feels sweet. I'm not doing dirty things around money. I haven't got these old money wounds about money being for a certain type of person, and money is associated with negativity and death and manipulation and all of this nonsense. Money allows me to make free videos on YouTube. Free videos on YouTube reach thousands of people to make a positive impact on the world. And I like earning my money through my self-actualizing principles as materialized into a life of service. It's a strong point to end on. It won't relate to everyone. If you have watched all the way to the end and you're somebody who's in retirement, this is a different story. But if you're still in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, or even your 50s, is there a way for you to turn your self-actualizing energy outwards towards the world in a way that will give back to you double and triple in terms of not just the emotional wealth, but the literal financial wealth? There's a baseline of financial wealth. Some people say at the time of recording that once you go over about £50,000, £60,000 per year, you don't really get a quality of life increase once you've got basic needs met. In the UK, at least, I think different countries have different rates of, like, once you're at a certain level, you don't get that much happiness at a certain end. I don't even know if that's true. I think, for example, the ability to go on a trip. I one day want to go and visit the pyramids. It's going to be quite expensive to go and do a guided tour of the pyramids and learn history. It's going to be the same if I go over to the Great Wall of China, or if I travel to a certain site in Latin America. That requires a lot of money. For most people, if you want to do it at true depth, you're going to need money. And for me, personally, to labor the point, the self-actualizing individual, by my conviction, by my life, by my essence, by what I stand for, and the clients I work with who's the happiest, the healthiest, and the most consistently tilted towards self-actualization, they've figured out a way to earn money by being themselves. In essence, that's what they do. They've learned skills, they've learned things that they can deliver, there's ways to offer value to the world, but they're fundamentally themselves. And that means for multiple decades in a row, there's not this fragmentation and friction between who they are 9 to 5 and who they are when they're off the clock. Their life becomes a living dance of authenticity, and money comes back to them as a byproduct. Literal wealth is the foundation for emotional, spiritual, psychological wealth for many decades ahead, because it's much easier to be thoughtful and mindful when you've got a year worth of emergency savings. And you've got the ability to go on inspiring trips. And more importantly, and more significantly, at the lower levels of wealth, you eat organic food, you've got a place where you like training or sports that you like being involved with, and you can look after your health with things that give energy and life. And that costs a bit more money than the lower quality things in life. That's all I have to say. 15 points of self-actualization. I have torn a book in half. We have reached the record mark of the longest one-take video that I've ever done in my life. And maybe this is a synchronicity in itself, that the truly self-actualized YouTube video goes all the way through, longer than expected. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. And again, please do leave a comment down in the comment section if you have a particular insight that's come through. And I do invite you to go check out the Shadow Work Library, which is the online course, which is the materialization of 5 years of self-actualizing effort. I spent tens of thousands, well, over 10,000, about 12,000 hours reading and rereading books so that you don't have to, and I give you the 36 best ones so that you can self-actualize. It all comes back together. I've loved this video. I hope you love yourself a little bit more after realizing just how much positive work you've done, how much healing, how much change, how many struggles and trials and challenges you've overcome. And if, like me, you have your areas of weakness, I have my area of confusion and complexity. Here I am in this kind of video. I need a bit more simplicity in my life, and I'm working on it. I'm working on it with having an offline phone, taking YouTube out of my week for 3 days per week, and simplifying. I'm working on that. I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress. But let's stay tilted towards the actualized potential. Let's look towards what we could be and become that which we see. Because I can't think of a better way to live life. And I'll be right there beside you, doing my version of that too. I'll see you in the comments section.